right, so thank you very much for coming
Absolutely.
to AMS in the Air, the podcast. And I'm here sitting today with Jeff Evans. He's the MIC in Houston,
meteorologist
Galveston.
in charge.
Meteorologist in charge, that's right. A lot of people don't know the acronyms.
I know the acronyms, I know.
Yeah.
I have a lot of them.
We always joke around in the podcast saying it's not meteorology if there's not an acronym,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So,
we got one in already, so that's
there
good.
we go. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you start? How long were you in where you were stationed at?
It's interesting. My story's a little different than most because I spent a lot of time in a national center. I started with the forecast office, national center, back to forecast office. I grew up in western Oklahoma, so I just fascinated with significant storms, tornadoes, really natural disasters in general just fascinated me. It seems kind of morbid, but it just always was very interesting to me. So it's, the day-to-day weather was never my thing, but reading about the tri-state tornado or Krakatoa or any of these big natural disasters. So when at some point in my life, I think probably 9-10 years old, I kind of watched the TV weather and said, I want to do that.
On TV or
well, just meteorology. Like, what is it that they're doing? And shortly after that, we had the April 10, 1979 Red River tornado that struck Wichita Falls. We had a big outbreak and hit Lawton, where I grew up, in Oklahoma. And that was it for me. It just kind of sealed the fascination with tornadoes. And so I pursued that, went to Oklahoma, got my degree, and started up in Wyoming. Sheridan, which is now closed, Cheyenne. And my fascination with tornadoes and severe weather brought me into what's now SPC. And I guess that had been 1995. So I spent about 15 years there.
Wow.
Was the lead. Decided I kind of wanted to scratch a different itch, so to speak, with my career. I was nearing 40 years old and decided to go into the WCM, Warning Coordination Meteorology role in Tallahassee, Florida. Took that and moved on to the meteorologist in charge job in Houston in 2014.
Wonderful city, by the way.
It's a great city.
Love it.
When I took the job, it was in a drought, so I'm kind of hoping the drought comes back at this point.
Yeah.
So it's been a very, very challenging and interesting last 5 years in Houston, no doubt.
So what was the biggest difference that you feel between the SBC as a professional in the field?
Right.
As a meteorologist, between the SBC and a National Weather Service office?
I think one of the biggest things at the National Center, you really have a lot more opportunity to focus on science. Mm-hmm. And you're more, you're not necessarily the jack of all trades.
Yeah.
So if you're at the Hurricane Center, your focus is hurricanes. If you're at Storm Prediction Center, your focus is going to be significant storms, high impact storms. So obviously at the forecast office, you're the jack of all trades.
Yeah.
So this morning I did a talk on hazmat support.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't deal with those kind of things at the national level. And then what I loved about coming back to the WFO is, especially as a warning coordination meteorologist, is really getting out and meeting the people that are making these decisions, and interacting and finding ways to meet their mission better. So and that's something you don't get as much at the National Center either. So those are the two biggest differences, I would say.
Okay. So you've been in Houston since 2014?
Correct. Summer of 2014.
Summer of 2014.
Yes.
All right. So that was the drought.
They're coming out of the drought.
And then 2015, there was that big flood in April.
Yes.
April, May.
It was a Memorial Night.
Yes.
The first big Houston flood in August.
Then, of course, everything from there on.
And it just kept going. It just kept going. We had the Memorial Night flood, and then we had Tropical Storm Bill shortly after that. Then we had a big tornado outbreak, and and another flooding event on Halloween of 20. So it just kept snowballing. And then obviously it culminated with Harvey in 2017. But in between, we've hosted a Super Bowl.
Yes.
People don't realize that's a big support effort for the National Weather Service, even though NRG was a dome.
Yeah.
But yet we're still supporting our core partners. So that's a multi-week support effort.
Yes.
Highly visible, worldwide visible support effort. We've done World Series.
World Series, that's right.
So recently. So these are things that we typically deploy to the city of Houston and support. And then we just had the Deer Park ITC
Closure.
fire. That was a month-long support effort with that big fire, and that was a challenge in a slightly different way because you're the meteorologist, so you're the subject matter expert on something that you're not real comfortable in because we're not chemists.
Yeah.
But yet you kind of have to wear that hat and kind of get your way through that.
Yeah.
So a lot of challenges with it.
I can relate because I do broadcasting, and
so you guys do the same. Yeah,
we do
you
the
wear a
same
lot of
thing. And
hats.
on air, when I worked in Houston, there was a spill. I think it was a chemical spill
The
on the
spill in the bay? Or?
Yeah, no, it was in a road, and
Okay.
and I remember I had to get on TV and say, okay, yeah, well, it's hot, it might react, it might not react. I don't remember exactly what it was, but you have to act like that because
You're
it. You're the scientist.
You're the scientist.
Yeah. So one thing that really strikes me, even still, even not living in Houston at this point, the resiliency of the city.
Yes.
The partnerships. You know, I was so happy when I worked in Houston to see the partnerships between the National Weather Service, the media, the local government, and all
even
the support.
private companies.
Yes, private companies.
We don't have the divisions down there. And,
I love it.
And I think it's because the threats are so intense.
Yes.
And the magnitude in the population is so vulnerable that we all get it. We're all wanting to do the same thing. We all have the same core mission.
We're all in here together.
We're all in here together.
That's true, and I truly appreciate that. I mean, I've worked in other markets, and I notice it more now that there's starting to be more union, more and more support, more partnerships, and that's fabulous. I think that's what it's about.
Absolutely, and I'll go back to the ITC Deer Park fire from this last March. One thing that kind of pushed us was the media. Basically, help us communicate this.
Yeah.
Give us something. And as an agency, we had never created a kind of hazmat public image.
Yeah.
Because it's complicated.
You do weather.
You've got have parts per billion, and people don't know what all this means. So we had to, but we needed to meet a need for the media, and when we created what we called a smoke plume, and the media was able, they were able to go on air, at least show where the plume is, how high it is, where it's going to go tonight, because that's what people wanted to know.
Yeah. So, I mean...
But those partnerships are there. They had the trust to ask us, and we knew that what they needed to do, and we were able to meet that mission.
Yeah.
So it's all the same mission.
Now, Houston is such a diverse city.
Very diverse.
I mean, it's highly Mexican, but it's so diverse.
Oh, yeah.
It's
you go
such
down,
an
you hear
intercontinental...
Farsi, you hear Vietnamese. It's, yes.
What are the biggest challenges in that aspect, in the diversity aspect of
I
the
mean,
city?
I think it's kind of obvious, but it's just that communication level. Bringing in more Spanish speakers into our field, into the weather service in particular. So that's been a benefit. We have recently hired a Spanish speaker onto our staff, and that helped during Imelda, this past Tropical Storm Imelda last September. So that's a challenge, but the other languages, it is difficult. I know it's difficult for the media because the resources aren't the same. A lot of the Spanish-speaking TV stations don't have a team of 5 Mets.
No.
And so they're trying to get by on a Harvey 24/7 without that same kind of staffing, but yet they have a huge audience.
Yeah.
And so we are trying to help them the best we can on that, and that's something we're still learning. I think really as an enterprise, as a weather enterprise.
Yes.
Because different cultures, they look for different people of authority.
Yes.
And we're used to our traditional ways of how we model authority, but that may not be the same way in a certain other culture or community that's also found a home in Houston or other cities.
And the dialects. I mean, we're talking about different cultures, but then within each culture, there are different dialects.
Right.
And it's just a whole nother challenge.
It is.
Because you want to keep the consistency. You want to keep the message.
Right.
And it can get lost in translation, literally.
Literally lost in translation. So that's definitely been a large hurdle for us. And who have been really, really good partners with that are the emergency managers, because the emergency management community, they've really adapted more to that because they have to serve them. So they do a lot of the translations for us. to some degree. So that, but it's something, again, as a weather enterprise, we just have to do a better job with.
What do you see changing in the city in the next 10 years?
Wow,
Can be anything.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of movement for more flood mitigation efforts. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of that. I think people are looking back at the initial plans, and people don't realize, if they're not from the area, there are flood control reservoirs in the western parts, Addicks and Barker. Typically, they're just green parks.
Yeah.
People didn't ever realize what their role was until recently. They filled up, and they started even flooding homes behind them.
Yeah.
So, but when those were initially put in, there were other plans, different canals and different ways. There was supposed to be another reservoir. All those got nixed, and they're seeing that need now. So I think in the next 10 years, I could see a lot more efforts still going into flood mitigation. The problem that we're dealing with is what everyone's dealing with, especially with the change of climate, is how do you engineer your way out of a 6 to 7 inch an hour rainfall?
Can you?
I don't think you really can.
Yeah.
So we're trying to preach to people, especially in that area, the importance of flood insurance. Almost 80% of Harvey victims did not have flood insurance. And it's sad because when I talk to people, I have personal friends that also were in that group, and they said, well, no one told me I needed it.
I don't live near the coast, so
why do I need it? I'm not in the floodplain.
Yep.
No one told me I needed it. And it's frustrating to me that we haven't adapted a better model for that. You have to have fire insurance.
Yeah.
So why don't you have to have flood insurance? And if you're not in a floodplain, it's good because it's cheaper. It's quite a bit less money. So I think I pay $25 a month. And I know for someone with a fixed income that's still a lot of money, but that's less than a cell phone plan.
That is true.
And so we're trying to get through to people especially in the Houston area, that even though you don't live in a floodplain, you're in a flood-prone area.
Yeah.
And the floodplains are driven off of watersheds, and not necessarily just urban flooding.
Yeah.
So it's we're trying to get that message out there. I don't know. People tend to live in a bubble, and they don't really.
It's not going to affect me.
They don't want to see that risk, really.
Yeah.
So we're more flood aware than most communities, but we've got a long way to go.
Okay. How do you feel like the city itself is adapting? Because I see a lot of green initiatives in Houston.
Right.
Energy city of the world,
Well, I mean, there were lessons learned after Allison, where they did a lot of buyouts along some of the bayous, along Braes and different bayous in the city, and those buyouts were huge because those would have been homes that would have flooded again. Hundreds that they had purchased and bought out. So there's still those efforts going on. The city, they recognize the risks, and they're looking at different ways around mitigation efforts. But what we typically see, and I empathize, is when people flood, they just want to fix.
Yeah.
They don't want to mitigate for the next time because it's more time, more money.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I just want to get back in my kitchen.
Yes.
So they just want to fix it.
Yeah.
So that's a big hurdle. I don't really have an answer to that, but to try to let people realize that you could flood again.
And under current circumstances, you probably will.
You never. I mean, you got to realize Imelda just really kind of missed Metro Houston, but that was another 40-inch rainfall. That would have been another Harvey-like event had it been 20 miles west, and it was a Harvey-like event, and worse than Harvey for some areas between us and Beaumont, where the heaviest rainfall. So, these events that we start talking feet of rain are not as uncommon as we would like them to be.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious. It's right there in front of us.
So mitigation, awareness.
Right.
What can the regular Joe, the regular Jose, do to help out themselves, their neighbors, and you in the National Weather Service?
I think the key is that help themselves, and I think that people need to take a little more ownership and not expect another entity to come fix it. Yeah. So look at your risk and take a really honest look at your risk and what are some of the things that you can do, that you can afford to do to help mitigate that. We're trying to do better with the science and predictability. So if we could get to where we can accurately predict where these 20-inch bullseyes are going to fall, then people could put their furniture up on cinder blocks, and they could say, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
The next step is inundation. So what does 30 inches of rainfall mean as far as flooding goes? So that's the next modeling hurdle, is taking the water out of the sky, modeling it, what it's going to do on the ground. How deep is it going to be? Is it going to be rooftop level? Is it going to be 2 feet deep? And that might help getting to where we could actually evacuate along bayous.
Yeah.
So scientifically, we're going to do our part. But to go back to the core part of your question, it's really neighbors taking care of neighbors, families taking care of families. And for Joe or Jose, be honest with your risk assessment. And if you don't know, reach out to your emergency management, reach out to your National Weather Service, and help. We can try to help you understand what risk you really have.
Okay. What's next for the National Weather Service in Houston, Galveston, Houston?
We're just we're plugging along. I mean, a lot of those efforts that I just mentioned with the inundation and with more accurate predictability, we're doing our best on that. We're going to start incorporating more of the convective allowing models into our decision making and getting that more out to decision makers. We've been reluctant to, because they can be spectacularly wrong. And so you have to be careful with that. But we do think it can help more probabilistically to say, hey, there are some models showing 30 inches of rain tonight.
Yeah.
So I think that's the next big step for us. And then expanding, as you had mentioned, in the Spanish language and other efforts like that. So, we still have our hurdles. I just gave a talk this morning on Hurricane Michael.
Yeah.
If that would have hit Houston.
Oh yeah.
Which we all know would be bad, but we're trying to quantify that in a way, because I actually did the inland survey for the wind damage for Michael. Oh. So I was able to take pictures 30 miles, 60 miles, 80 miles inland, and now I can bring that back to Houston and say, this is Conroe, this is Friendswood, this is Katy, and it resonates with people a little bit more. And so we're trying to figure out the next time we have a big 1900 type of hurricane, which was the Galveston hurricane, another Michael type storm, which will happen eventually. How will we message that? How will we move forward with that? Right now it's always run from the water and hide from the wind. We want to get the flood prone people out, but do we tell people inland in a substandard home that's going to have 130 mile an hour winds that they're supposed to stay? We're struggling with that.
It is.
We're struggling with that.
As media, I can tell you, we always say, well, every storm is different. Every storm is different. But then we have to have a point of comparison.
Absolutely.
And then which one do we pick this time? And and how do we
We have to be careful with that.
Yes, we have to be really careful with that.
For Harvey, for instance, we didn't want to do too many comparisons to Allison.
Yes.
Because Katy didn't flood in Allison.
Mm-hmm. And
neither did the Sugarland. And that was the eastern part of the city.
Yep.
So we had to be careful with that. If you mention a storm, we're like, oh, okay, then that's them.
Yes.
So we had problems.
Didn't happen to me. It's not going to happen again.
And even in Galveston County, going into Harvey, the prior 4 flash flood emergencies we had dealt with were all Houston. Mm-hmm. So they were thinking, oh, Houston's going to get it again.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, this is us too this time.
It's everybody this time.
This is us too. Yes. So we always fight the last storm in our minds.
Well, I want to thank you personally, because you've done an excellent job, the National Weather Service in Houston.
Well, I appreciate that.
And all your team there. I mean, Dan, right, it's wonderful too. And I've first-hand participation and witness to everything that you guys do, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure
it's a great community down there. So the whole weather enterprise in Houston, we're all a family. We work together, and I think that's why we've had quite a few successes. And you look at Imelda in Harris County, we only had 2 fatalities, and that's not an accident.
That's true. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate it.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you.